Well, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you happen to be tuning in from, wherever in the world you happen to be tuning in from. And I do know we've got people from all over the world. I was spotted various different continents in the registration list today. So a very warm welcome to this BA community webinar, where we're going to be discussing the tricky topics of business architecture, business analysis, change, how perhaps a BA, because I know many of us that tune into these webinars are from an analyst background, how we can traverse that tricky career trajectory. I'm really pleased to say that today we're joined by Lisa Woodall. And Lisa and I were talking before the webinar. We first met when we were working for a large insurance company, and Lisa reminded me that a program that we both worked on was nearly 20 years ago. So I must have been like 10 at the time, I think, because I'm certainly only 30 at most in my mind. And we've stayed in touch ever since. But I mean, I think, Lisa, it's fair to say that you've got experience in just about every facet of change, from analysis to architecture. You've got reputation as a senior business leader that can really lead change and get stuff delivered with that sort of track record for shaping. So you have that ability to see the analysis, the architecture, the leadership, the sponsorship, the whole holistic piece. So thank you very much for being here today, for taking time out to have a chat.
I'm happy to be here, Adrian. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, me too. So just before we get started, for those of you that are joining, and I can see people filing into the virtual room as we speak, the Q&A will be open. So you can ask a question at any time, and at various points during the session, we'll answer questions, and we'll answer as many questions as we can in the time. I'm also going to put in the chat shortly a link to the mural board for this session. I'm just going to share my screen now so you can see what that looks like. So I haven't put this in the chat yet, but when I do, you'll click through and you'll see you shouldn't need to sign up. You'll just see here you've got like visiting RAM or whatever. Enter as a visitor, and then so you should be seeing this now, and you can see you've got a little kind of mural board there, and this is a form of collective note-taking. So you can, for example, if there's a topic that really resonates with you, you can click through and add your own note. You can be really creative. You can add icons and stuff, pictures, shapes, and I'll publish this on LinkedIn after. So it's a really great way of capturing the session for those who perhaps can't be there. So please do participate. I'll put that link in the chat in just a moment. And over on the right-hand side, you'll also find some handy links so you can click through. You have to click through on these little buttons here, so you can connect with Lisa or me. You can see other upcoming webinars and so on. So I will just pop that link in the chat for you all now. So do make good use of that. So a lot for us to talk about, Lisa. And I think one challenge I see a lot on platforms like LinkedIn, and when I speak to business architects, is to define business architecture, what it is and what it isn't. So without wanting to put you on the spot too much, how would you define business architecture?
I mean, it's a great question, Adrian, and you're right. We can all spend time on LinkedIn, and you can Google it. And everyone will have a different opinion of what it is. And I think I have an opinion as well, which maybe some people have and some people don't. So for me, business architecture is really the business model of an organisation. It's looking at the people, the processes, the tech, the data, the business partners, the suppliers, the governance, the culture, the mindsets, all of that stuff, and how it comes together to operate in business. And it's like an operating model for me. And it's how all of the different parts come together to deliver the business result, would be how I describe it. Probably the theory that I often look back on would be Zachman, and how Zachman looks at the different layers of the business and how that comes together. But I tend to move away from theory very quickly and start to sort of model a business. And that's what I would see business architecture as being.
It's interesting, as you were talking there, and you were talking about processes and how things come together. And you were mentioning Zachman and his framework, or I think ontology. He likes to refer to it as an ontology, doesn't he? But the point being that it's from my knowledge of it, it's about some, the intersections of things like why, when, what, how, things which have a natural constructs in the sort of real world. So questions like that, like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? How are we doing it? Are those some of the sort of key questions that you think would drive business architecture?
Absolutely. I mean, much of a business architect's role is looking at the as is and questioning the why, what, and how of the as is, and then looking to the future of where the organisation needs to go to hit the targets, and then looking at the why, what, and how we're going to get to the future. So very much so, Adrian, it is those sort of big macro questions that get asked in the business architecture space.
Which leads neatly onto the next question, because a lot of people would listen to that and think, conceptually, that sounds similar to business analysis. And how would you say it's similar? How would you say it's different? Where are the similarities and differences between analysis and architecture?
So in my experience, a business analyst is more at a project level and a program level. And it could be a business change program or an IT change program that's looking at how the business needs to change in a specific project or a program. As the architecture role is that broader portfolio of the enterprise overall. And I think the similarities are very much around the curiosity, the asking questions, the analytical nature of listening to many stakeholders and trying to assimilate a model or an answer or a process into it. So the tools and techniques we use could be very similar. It's just the level of analysis that's happening. You're either down at a sort of a transaction level, a process level, a team level, or you're up at multiple teams across the organisation. And I very much see, having come from an analyst myself, that the tools you learn as an analyst, you can start on a small project to a medium-sized project to a large project. All of those skills that I've learned on being on projects at various levels has enabled me to arrive at a business architect role and bring those skills and approaches to the role. It's just the scope of the role is that much bigger.
Yeah, and again, as you were speaking there, one thing I've been wondering, because often as analysts, one of the places we might start is with process. That's not always the case. We might start with, by looking at a data view or whatever, but process is one of the places to start. And I wondered whether that's an intersection, like a natural place of collaboration, because I would guess, at an architectural level, you might be looking at, say, capability, sort of motivation, capability, and then capabilities will have a relationship with the processes that actually use, and there'll be many-to-many relationships between those. But perhaps, and I'm just testing this idea, perhaps BAs, we might talk about high-level process analysis, but that might be quite low level for you as an architect, because you've got this, if we imagine a conceptual stack, you're looking above that stack and we're looking at that and below. Is that fair, or am I overanalyzing, which is always possible?
No, absolutely. And it could be at the data level, the process level, or at the requirements level. And I think, I like to look at a business architect as the jigsaw puzzle, and the business analyst being all the bits that come together to make the jigsaw puzzle up. And I think process flows through the jigsaw to create the picture, the overall picture. You don't get the picture until all the pieces are put together, and a process doesn't start and stop with a system or a business process. It flows from somebody doing something manual into the system and out the other end, and what the customer then ultimately does with whatever they get is a subsequent process too, in terms of the customer journey and the customer experience. So absolutely, that process thread could be seen as a key backbone of the two disciplines.
A kind of backbone and meeting point, and perhaps shows or emphasises the shared skill set. But we're just looking at it. We're looking at it from a different angle, with a different motivation. I just want to pick up though something, Lisa, you said there about customer experience, because I mean, certainly in the BA world, and I think quite rightly so, we hear more and more about customer experience, customer journeys, employee journeys, which I think we should hear even more about those. It's often the external journeys, but we should think about the internal as we hear about things like empathy, and important topics, fairly clear how they fit with analysis. But I mean, how would you see those sorts of ideas fitting with architecture and analysis and other change roles? Because they sometimes feel like they're almost, they're sort of off on the side with the customer experience team or the UX team or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if I go back a few years, when I started as a business analyst, I was very much in an old-fashioned organisation, and we were only developing internal systems, and the customer would phone up and talk to somebody that was using the system, or they'd actually go in and speak to someone who was using the system. The fact that most of our business change and IT change results in the end customer self-serving more and more says that customer journey and the customer experience is a really important angle for us to explore. We can't rely on our internal teams to have the voice of the customer. We need to get as close to the end customer as possible to understand their pain points and what they need to be addressed, to come up with a solution that's going to be right for the end customer. And I think we're seeing that rise of customer journeys, UX experience, just because so many business models now are businesses that are online, and your user is your customer. As going back 10, 15 years ago, your user would have been an employee.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think, as you say, a lot of the business model innovation has pushed the automation boundary. Yeah, and I'm speaking, I guess, with an analyst hat on, but it's pushed the automation boundary closer to the customer. So you think about banking. I can't remember the last time I went into a branch. I don't think my local branch is even there anymore. I think it's been closed down. But it's actually more convenient to bank online, and you can even do things like, scan your checks. Not that, but I mean, who uses checks? But theoretically, you can scan your checks with your mobile phone. And that leads me to a slight tangent, which is those sorts of changes have an impact on people who might rely on branches, for example. Is there a role in analysis and/or architecture to try and understand those unintended consequences of change? Because, for example, moving a digital transformation might be good for 80% of your users, but that's not so good if you're the 20% type of thing.
Well, I think this is where the analyst role really comes into its own, to actually be thinking about the unintended consequences of that change and making sure that the minority aspect is also covered, not just the majority aspect. And I think, from an analyst point of view, it really is looking for the unknown and unexplored areas that a team may not look at if they haven't got an analyst in the team. Yeah. And I think one thing that analysts can do very much now in the 2020s is really turn up the dial on thinking about the end customer and really start to really question, well, how is the end customer going to experience this? Yes, take the view of your internal stakeholders. Yes, take the view of some of the internal processes that you're looking at, but really, really get to the heart of asking the why, what, and how of the person who's interfacing with the business. And that takes a step change in your approach to analysis. It makes you have to ask those more broader questions and find different ways to elicit requirements that you wouldn't necessarily previously had to encounter.
Absolutely, and actually getting as close as you possibly can to the people who do the work and the customers who are experiencing the processes or experiencing the product. Because I've been guilty, we've probably all been guilty of designing lovely processes in nice comfortable conference rooms, and there just aren't enough people who actually know what it's like on the front line to make an informed decision. So we've got some questions coming in, and if you are attending live, do feel free to ask questions. We'll cover as many of them as we can. So Dan asks, what are the differences between an architect and a strategist? Both roles look at challenges, external and internal, and the scope of the changes must be at such a high level to be strategic in scope. So what would you say the difference between an architect and a strategist, if indeed there is one, a difference?
I guess in my experience, I work with line of business leads and managing directors and business owners, and I see them as the strategists. It's their business, their division, their line of business that they need to bring in revenue or reduce costs, and where the architect plays is around the capabilities to deliver the strategy that they're laying out. So in my head, they come very much from the industry knowledge, the business knowledge, in terms of where their customers are, which customers they want to attract, price points. As I come at it very much from, but what are the core capabilities in people, data and tech to deliver?
Yeah.
So it's sort of, they're sort of in partnership and have to be in partnership.
And it's interesting. This is reminding me of a conversation I had with someone years ago. I can't for the life of me remember who, but I was talking about how in business analysis you have a kind of natural why, what, how hierarchy, and we had this really interesting conversation about, well, but actually sometimes one person's how is another person's why. And now I'm putting it together with what we were talking about earlier, with perhaps processes being an intersection, where the business owner might have a why, what, how, but then actually that how might be a why to an architect, who then does a capability map and does some capability gap analysis, and then that and the motivation for developing those capabilities might be a why to a business analyst, who then figures out the what, the requirements, and the how, and we're getting down to a developer so we've almost got a cascade of why, what, hows throughout the sort of
absolutely. And I think in that cascade, the key roles to join all the dots up are having the business architects and the business analysts joining all of that up.
Yeah.
And I think that's the power of analysts and architects on change programs, that we do bring that ability to join up. How is this all going to work together? What needs to be considered both in the manual processes and the system processes and the way we work? I think only the analyst architects community can bring that to an organisation.
Definitely that coherence, and that leads us to another question that's been asked, actually. Emily asks, do you have practical tips on how to develop a clear, coherent business model if multiple stakeholders have different conflicting perspectives? How do you even begin to organise this information? And I don't know about you, Lisa, but I find conflicting perspectives is normal. I mean, that's just life, isn't it? So how do you get that coherence in a complex political environment?
It's a great question, and I think as analysts at any level, you're faced with conflicting stakeholder needs. You go and talk to a couple of users, and they both have a different view on how they want to do a transaction. That's exactly the same at the business model level. And I think the beauty of business architecture is you have to represent all of the stakeholders' views together, and you have to spend time going to the finance director, the HR director, the managing director of the line of business, the operational director, and get their view to be able to pull the whole picture together. And it's not so much conflict, it's more trying to share each other's perspectives, and you end up being a sort of facilitator of giving another stakeholder an alternative point of view that would never have been tabled if you'd left the two functions to talk to each other. So you're sort of facilitating consensus of understanding, and it's going around the table and pulling that model together, and you'll find your models evolve. And you can be in one insurance company and in another insurance company and end up with two very different business models. Fundamentally, they have claims, they have underwriting, they have sales, they have service, but that's probably where the similarity stops once you start talking to the different stakeholders.
Yeah, and it's because I'm a bit of a geek in systems thinking, in the systems thinking world. One thing, if any of you listening in are familiar with soft systems and Checkland's work, Checkland used to talk about an accommodate, like consensus isn't, you can't always get consensus, but you can get an accommodation. Like okay, it might not be everyone's preferred option, but you get everyone feels heard, and they feel they've had the opportunity to speak, and there's a an agreement going forward. So it's sort of about that accommodation, I suppose.
And I often find once you start exploring with a part of the business in detail, they've often got more to say about other parts of the business than they have about their own.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting perspective to get in terms of what do you think about function X? How does function X work for you? Because then essentially they could be a customer of function X. And then how do you think you provide your services to that function? And I often find them start to sweat a bit when you realise that they've just spent 20 minutes telling me about how everything on the other side of the fence can improve. And they haven't necessarily considered that they also need to improve too.
Yeah.
And that can be an interesting conversation.
Yeah, and again, you think about sort of with an architectural hat on, like you would never design an aeroplane by splitting the team up and saying, well, you go and design the engines, you go and design the landing, the landing gear, you go and design the airframe, and design it. If you design it in a complete siloed way, the pieces would never fit when you brought them back together. That's how most organizations evolve, isn't it? You get the marketing team that design all the marketing stuff, the ops do all the ops. So I suppose it's another thing that I suppose analysts talk, we talk about systemic and holistic thinking. Architecture is presumably doing that, like, uber holistic, systemic, big time thinking.
I mean it is, but I think there are some fundamental questions to ask at the architectural level in terms of what is your core competencies? What are you going to build, borrow, make yourself, and what are you going to outsource and insource? Some of those sorts of questions, there's less permutations and combinations to what there is once you get down to some of the process questions in terms of who's going to do what, where, and what sort of questions you're going to ask. So in some ways, I might find an architect's role and challenge is easier than once you get down into the detail. But the key thing about the architect is you put the framework in place.
Yeah.
And everyone always uses the analogy of the architect of the house versus the builder who comes in and builds it, and then the decorator who ultimately decorates it. That's a great analogy. The architect is the person who's put the boundaries in place, worked out the optimum sizes of the rooms, worked out the key functional things that every house is going to need, a bathroom, a kitchen. But it's the builder who actually has to get on and build it and deal with the unforeseen consequences that we mentioned before this call.
Yeah.
And do some quick fixes and some, workarounds that the architect may not have considered when they designed their Uber idea.
Yeah.
So, I think both roles have challenges that are unique to it that make the roles complex.
Yeah.
It's the level that you're working at.
It's the level of abstraction, that sort of scale. So I tell you, let's bring in a second. So a second question from Dan, and Dan says, second question. Sorry, absolutely no, nothing to be sorry for asking a second question, Dan. Looking at CX UX, how is the architect role different from, say, a customer success role? And I suppose it depends on what we mean by customer success role, because that's quite a broad term.
Yeah, I'm struggling with that customer success term. I mean, I've worked with chief customer officers and chief marketing officers that own the sort of end-to-end customer journey, and they will have subject matter experts in the marketing area that own that journey and own that. And as an architect, I'd be looking at it as a component of the overall business and how it plugs into the front end and back end, and how it plugs into the overall organisation. So I don't think any of the role of an architect is going into the domain detail. It's how the domains all plug together.
Mm-hmm.
Now a customer experience officer would say, well, they're looking at how the whole customer journey comes together, and that's great. But then it's how the customer journey links into the rest of the capabilities of the business that I would then focus on.
Yeah, and it's sort of interesting as well, because customer and that's the thing, isn't it? If you're looking at customer journey and customer experience, it's always an accommodation. It's always a balance, in that you want to offer the best customer experience you can, which fits with the value proposition that the organisation is, that the organisation is proposing. And a classic example there is customer experience in, say, a discount airline is different from CX in a full, a luxurious business class only airline type of thing. And it should be different, because if you've got them mixed up, that you've broken the value proposition. So I suppose there's that element of making sure it fits with that broader business proposition as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, if we think about analysts and business architects as well, I think the key thing is we're staying ahead of the trends.
Yeah.
That we're looking at how other businesses, either in our own industries or other businesses in different industries, are modelling their business, putting processes into their business, and how we can beg, steal and borrow from all of those to also bring them into our organisation. And I often find that we as a profession, whether that's analysts or architects, look so inward that we don't actually step up and step out and look about what's becoming the norm around payment processes. I mean, we've all been on the web, we've all put our credit card details in, we've all put the expiry date in, we've all done that on multiple websites, and the experience is very different. And then Amazon came along, swipe right to buy. I don't even know my credit card details anymore. If a website doesn't make it easy, I'm not going to entertain it. That's become the norm. And I think staying up and looking at what are some of the norm ways of working, and that's with employee experience or customer experience in other businesses. Yeah. It's going to become the norm for us. And I think for us, it's about getting on the front foot and informing a business to say, we've got to be embracing this change in our program because it's going to be the norm.
Yeah. You don't want to be I'm sure you can remember, I can remember, some people on the call might be able to remember where, you order something from a paper catalogue and it was 28 days delivery, and that was normal, right? And that was just normal. I suppose you don't want to be the company that's saying, well, if we shave it from 28 to 21 days, wouldn't that be a good thing to do when Amazon are doing it in 24? It's sort of rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. So I'll just bring in a question here from Oksana. So Oksana says, Lisa, thank you for such an insightful presentation. I have one question considering customer experience, as this is sometimes intangible and always perishable. So how would you recommend to measure the so-called customer delight was met, and to what extent, beyond CSAT, so customer satisfaction, and NPS, so Net Promoter Score? Some companies measure customer effort score. The effort the customer spends during their journey, the lesser the score is, the better the delight is. So would you recommend those ways, like CSAT, NPS, customer effort score, or are there other ways that we should have in mind as analysts?
I mean, the CSAT and NPS is naturally the place that many organisations go to. I wonder how many of you have looked at TripAdvisor when you've gone to stay at a hotel or on holiday, and you've seen the reviews, the customer reviews. And this is more sort of qualitative rather than quantitative stuff, but there is a whole rich load of information about how customers are experiencing your products or your services on reviews throughout the web. And I would encourage everyone to look at reviews about what customers are saying about your organisation, and look more to the textual responses rather than the scores, because there is so much richness in those reviews that you can read them and think, oh, that's the pain points our customers are experiencing. And it could be that they've been exceptionally happy with a hotel manager, or they've been exceptionally unhappy with a hotel manager, or the bedroom was too small, or the bedroom was too big, or the curtains didn't shut. That gives you such a rich set of information to improve on the experience. And more businesses are grabbing reviews, and that should be a real core collateral that you look at to improve customer experience.
Yeah, and it's interesting because as you were speaking there, I was thinking about like a resource which I don't think is tapped enough, are customer complaints. Like these are
absolutely.
These are the customers that have actually taken time, not just to leave, but to tell you how bad your processes are. And it's funny with customer journey mapping. One of the things I'm when the opportunity arises, I always think is a great idea. Is let's map the journey we think we're giving a particular segment. Then let's figure out the journey we're actually giving them. And let's look at the delta between the experience that we're actually and the data's there. But I love the idea of like Google reviews. I'd never really thought. I mean, it's so obvious in retrospect, but the insight is out there. So
the great thing about reviews is that they pull across all of your business processes.
Yeah,
and I think your complaints process is a key one. And any of us that have ever made a complaint, it's usually 28 days before anybody responds. I go back to your catalogue example that you gave, Adrian, and I just wonder whether, improving on the resolution of customer complaints and making sure your processes change overnight as a consequence of them would be a fascinating place to be in. So I would say, sure, get the scores, but the world is full of a lot richer information now that we can all analyse far quicker than we've ever been able to analyse and assimilate opportunities from.
Yeah, it reminds me of a fairly serious complaint with an organisation which I did get resolved after 6 months, and an external body upholding my complaint first. But the person that resolved it inside the organisation was called a complaint resolution officer. And I thought, well, that tells me everything I need to know. You're there to resolve the complaint. You're not there to improve the service. You're there to resolve the complaint. And, I sort of sometimes, complaints departments can be two things, can't they? They could be like a hamper and go away, we just need it resolved department, or they can be we actually want to improve the service. And it's a huge opportunity there. But segueing away from that, and because what I'm detecting is there is an overlap. There's a natural overlap between analysis, architecture. You've mentioned that idea of stepping up and stepping out. So I'm going to ask the controversial question. Do job roles and job titles matter? Or are we as communities perhaps guilty of being within our own silos? Should we all be more multidisciplinary? What do you reckon?
I think we all should be more multidisciplinary. I think the job titles help show the differences as well as the similarities. And I do think we should, the webinars about career progression, going from an analyst maybe up to an architect, maybe to a transformation director, maybe to a change director, maybe to an enterprise architect, who knows? And I do think it does show progression. It shows expectation of role. But I don't think we should all limit our thinking to just being an analyst. If I'm an analyst, I could consider the broader business architecture when I'm doing analysis. And if I'm an architect, I shouldn't get too carried away with the big macro vision without giving some thought to what it's going to mean to the analysis community. So I think I think it's good to have titles. I think it's interesting to see how different organisations pull role profiles around those titles together, and we can't totally assume that a business architect at Zurich will be the same as a business architect at Auden Survey, because it's so much driven by the business we work for. But I think it is important to delineate between the roles.
Yeah, fantastic. So we've got quite a few questions coming in, so we'll take a few more questions now. So Zara asks, is there any training, either formal or informal, that someone wanting to make the move from senior or lead business analyst to business architecture should take to learn the skills and bump up the CV? So I suppose that, and I'm interpreting Zara's question there as about being probably about training and or recognised certification, that sort of thing. Anything in the business architecture world?
I mean, a lot of the BizBoc work stems into business architecture, and there are some sort of niche training providers on LinkedIn that you can find, which I'm happy to share with you, Adrian, so you can share with the group, that are very good at the design of business architecture, target operating models, stakeholder management, all of that. That there is a load of training you can go on. There are loads of books you can read, but you can't beat working in a good business architecture team or experiencing a program that has business architecture and business analysts on it. It is something that, as a senior role, it sort of overlaps with stakeholder management, relationship management, industry knowledge, external networks. It's you can probably learn so much of it from a book or from a training course, but it's actually, like anything, the 70-20-10, it's actually experiencing the role with somebody as a mentor or a coach to help you through it. Because I even think as a business analyst, there are so many certifications you can do, so many tools and methods and approaches you can use. You can learn all about the tools, you can learn all about the methods, but how you apply them takes support, takes mentoring, takes development, takes coaching, takes peer support. And I think that should be encouraged, whether you're an analyst or an architect. But to answer the question, there is business architecture training available.
Yeah, and the BizBoc you mentioned is from the Business Architecture Guild. It's one heck of a document these days. It's got bigger and bigger and bigger. So as a follow-up question, Zara asks, what's the shorthand, like the abbreviation for business architecture if you're doing online research, given if you Google BA, you're probably going to get business analyst stuff. Is there would you just Google business architect, or is there another shorthand?
Well, you could do business architect, but BizArch, so BIZARCH, you could find some stuff with that.
Fantastic. Yeah, I know on LinkedIn and on Twitter that's used as a hashtag as well to for similar sort of articles. So that brings us to another one of the sort of core questions that we're looking to answer, which is around career planning, moving up, moving sideways. And you've referred to the importance of mentoring, and yes, training and certification might be part of it, but actually getting experience, getting hands-on experience. But there may well be BAs listening in who are thinking about career planning, where to go next. What would you say from your perspective, because you've seen such a wide range of change, business change and IT type roles? What roles would you say are open to, say, a BA or a senior BA? And which of the existing skills should a BA really play up to say, these are my unique selling points as a practitioner?
Oh God, there's about 10 questions in that.
I know, yeah, sorry, Lisa.
So, I guess, I've been lucky. I started out more with a business analyst bent than any other. I joined an IT department, but I joined as a business analyst, a junior business analyst, and it's opened up all manner of roles for me. So I did go into program management. I did go into business architecture. I'm obviously now into enterprise architecture. And I think there is career progression, I would say, more for a business analyst than for most roles, although you may not ever believe that yourselves, because you are in roles where you could very often be dealing with very senior stakeholders, which means they can get to know you, know your qualities, know your strengths. They often are running major change programs, and they often need an analyst to be involved in their next program and their next project, which can sort of encourage you to grow into that and grow into the business. And my only advice to anyone is take on that bigger challenge, with the support from around you, for sure. But if there's a big project that's happening, try and get on it. Make sure you're networking with, if you're a junior business analyst, make sure you're networking with a senior business analyst in your team. Don't feel intimidated by them. Go and have a chat with them and a coffee with them, and get involved in the project they're running. And likewise, don't be intimidated by a business architect either. And we're a great professional group of people, analysts and architects. We're curious, we're interested in people, and we actually like helping each other. So branch out in your network and make contacts and put your hand up and say, that project that's running, I want to be involved in it. And in terms of what you can bring in terms of your unique skill, I think that was one of the questions, Adrian.
Yeah.
I think it's to not just answer the immediate question that someone's asked you to do. Too often we can just process map and do a requirements document because someone's asked us to fill in a template. What will make you unique is you're starting to ask the questions, or trying to probe for the questions that should have been asked, rather than the questions that have been asked. So being curious, being open, and being prepared to play back to an organisation what the consequences might be of some of the answers that they've given you, in a way that encourages you to provide an alternative point of view, which could be a better outcome.
Yeah, I love that about not answering the question that you were asked, but probing for the question, for a better question, or the question that should have been asked, and highlighting those unintended consequences.
But with the goal, Adrian, to get the business outcome.
Yes, yes.
And actually, sometimes we can lose the business outcome. We can lose exactly what the business is striving for because we can actually get hung up in our process. So it's being mindful of what the business outcome really is and questioning in relation to the outcome that's trying to be achieved.
Yeah. And that's something, again, which connects both architecture and analysis, is that focus on business outcomes and business goals. And I know myself, and I'm guilty of this, many analysts are, it's really easy to get caught in the love, because we all love models. It's really easy to get lost in the model, and you've got to think, actually, this model is a representation. It isn't the thing. It just has to be good enough. So Rushma asks, how technical, so in IT terms, would you need to be in order to be a business architect?
I guess that question's coming from a point of view that an IT architect is often very technical. And I think as a business architect, I think you have to be able to talk in quite a senior business context. So someone earlier asked, what's the difference between a strategist and a business architect? And I think where you have to be with business architecture is you have to be able to talk about the business without necessarily knowing the detail of it. And so it probably is in a order of magnitude around experience. So when you look at IT architect roles, you often see, the junior architect roles about 7 years, the senior architects are 10 to 15 years. An architect role is a result of having worked on multiple programs, having experienced multiple different challenges and scenarios. And it's more breadth of experience, I think, Adrian, is what I'd say, rather than technical deep knowledge.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I like I like what you were saying there, Lisa, about almost the being okay with ambiguity. I think you said something like being able to talk about the business without knowing the detail of the business, and that's again I think an overlap, because I think it's one of the things I know I struggled with when I made the transition from BA to sort of senior and lead BA, is we don't know the answer to that, and that's okay. We know, but we know we will need to know the answer to it, but we don't know yet, and that's okay. And yeah, it's uncertain and it's risky, but that's okay. It kind of makes my heart pound even saying that with nervousness. But
I mean, my current role at Ordnance Survey, I have roles in the team that are enterprise design consultants. So they're design consultants, not analysts, but they pull on all the analyst skill set, and we spend our weeks, days and months in complete ambiguity, because it is looking at the future, and actually being able to be resilient in ambiguity is a very important thing when it comes to architecture, because you're scenario planning. You know, it's not definitive, it is scenario planning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's always an element of uncertainty with that, because it's just a scenario. It's just I suppose, you know, there's uncertainty and risk with all of that. So Martha asks, is business analysis the only way into the business architecture world? I suspect the answer is no. Are there any other common routes you see?
So I think absolutely not. You know, if I look at some of the people that I've met that have become business architects, they've been in operational improvement, you know, process analysts, process improvement, Six Sigma, green belts, black belts. They've grown into fabulous business architects. Operational managers who have run operational centres can grow into quite good business architects, because they've had to manage an operational process and they can bring that up another level. So absolutely, there are a whole load of other roles that can come into the business architecture family. I think the other key thing, people were talking about training. You know, I do think a business degree or an MBA, if you really wanted to go there are modules around that are about business model design, business design thinking. And often people who have done MBAs, they could come from any domain, any functional background, can apply that into a business architecture space. So MBAs are probably another good space to look for, you know, the Uber business architect.
Yeah. So Craig asks another really good question, and I think one that's often confused. So I'm really glad, thank you, Craig, for asking this one, which is, what's the relationship between business architecture and enterprise architecture? Is there a difference in connotation?
Oh, Craig, I could spend another 3 hours. So I genuinely believe that an enterprise architect is the Uber architect role, and the fact that it's enterprise is an Uber business architect. But there will be IT colleagues of mine that will claim that the enterprise architect is the Uber IT architect role. But essentially, an enterprise architect is looking at data, it is looking at tech, it is looking at business processes, and it's looking at all the things I said as a business architect. But often, when you look at TOGAF, there are distinct business architect questions. There's infrastructure architect questions, there's application architect questions, and there's technology architecture questions that all come together into an overall enterprise role. So if you look at TOGAF, business architecture is a pillar of enterprise architecture, as I see business architecture as enterprise architecture, but I'm a bit at odds with the rest of the world with that one.
Yeah. That actually leads on to a question that Dan's asked, which is thinking about the sort of the actual job market for business architecture. Is it expanding, or does it have the same challenge that business analysis sometimes has of having to prove the role's relevance? So, you know, one thing we've had for probably like the last decade in business analysis is, what's the BA's role in Scrum, or the scaled agile framework, or whatever it happens to be. And he adds, I ask, because I've worked in many industries and have not come into contact with an architect, are there specific industries that that business architects are more common in? I mean, from my experience, financial services seems to be quite switched on to business architecture, but maybe that's just because that's my background.
Yeah, and for me, I think it's not so much the industry, it's the extent of transformation the company is going through. So you'll find business architect roles in organisations that are facing significant transformation. You won't find business architect roles in sort of more medium-sized or small businesses, and you won't find business architecture roles in organisations that are more in continuous improvement, incremental change. So you'll often find business architect roles on a contractor basis, if you like, in major transformation programs. And often the business architects are contractors in a business transformation program, with one or two permanent roles that are because that person has known the business for many years and can drive the change program. So it's not so much about industry, it's more the extent of change that the business strategy needs to go on, and therefore the amount of transformation that's needed. And the more transformation that's needed, the more you need a business architect. You can sometimes find business architect roles, and when you actually look under the surface, they're actually looking for a business analyst,
yes,
or something not quite as big as a business architect role.
Yes, the sort of hybrid or sort of be anything type of role, where it's a bit of lots of things. I just want to bring in two other questions before we sort of round off the session. So I'll bring in a question, and apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name. I think it's Imagus, who says, can business architecture be agiled? I guess that's agiled or agilized. So can it be made agile?
That's a great question. I think it probably can be. I mean, there is sort of a more longer term nature of business architecture that you continually look to. You look to the target operating model, and people say, should you come back to it annually, quarterly, monthly? I actually think you need to lay out your direction of travel, and you do need to constantly be revising it with the rhythm of the business. And if the rhythm of the business is very agile, then you need to be constantly refining that architecture in that agile way based on what's coming out. So it really is to go with the rhythm of the business. But I don't think there's an agile scrum sprint to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's interesting because the way I interpret it, and it would be interesting to see if your interpretation's the same, Lisa, but is business architecture is perhaps more relevant for discussions of business agility rather than agile as a method.
Yes.
So for example, sensing that there is a change in the external environment, figuring out the response to that change, what the capability gaps are to deliver that change, and then initiating the change to do it is architecture. Things like Scrum, so Scrum, and predominantly, let's face it, Scrum is predominantly 99 times out of 100 about software change. That might be the engine of delivering some of those technical capabilities, but business architecture is at the business agility level, whereas Agile is about agile delivery. Is that a fair summation, would you say?
Yeah, no, I like that. That would be great. Yeah, I like that, Adrian.
Good. Oh, good. I'm always worried I'm overanalyzing, but so final question. If there was one key takeaway, Lisa, that you'd want people listening in to take away from this session, what would that be?
I think my key takeaway would be, whether you're an analyst, whether you're an architect, whatever you're doing in a program or a project or a business, would be that step up and step out frequently. Really keep lifting your head up and see what's going on outside, and bring that back into the organisation in an analysis sense. And I think I sort of touched on it earlier as well. Really be certain that the question being answered is the right question that's going to get the best business outcome. So step up, step out, and really probe exactly what questions should be being answered with the analysis you're being asked to undertake. And that's whether you're at an analyst level or an architect level. Step up, step out, because that's what we are. We're gifted. We're analysts. We're gifted. We like to overanalyze things, and too often we internalize it. So keep encouraging yourself to lift up and lift out.
I love that. Step up, step out. Don't just ask the question that's being presented. Probe further, challenge. Always be thinking upwards, outwards, backwards, forwards. Well, Lisa, I mean, we could continue for the rest of the week, the decade talking about this, but we're very nearly at the end. If you are tuned in live, do stay just for a few more minutes, because I've got some other free links and free stuff I'll put in the chat just after we've close. But so Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm absolutely sure people will want to stay in touch. They'll want to connect with you. How can people stay in touch?
Well, I'm pretty prolific on LinkedIn. So please connect with me on LinkedIn. I accept anyone's connection that's not a salesperson. And I'm pretty certain you haven't got too many salespeople on the call, Adrian. So,
I'm sure.
So connect and we can connect there. And also, if you connect on LinkedIn, you'll see that I've become quite a prolific blogger during lockdown.
Yeah.
That may not continue as I go into the rest of the years ahead, but there's my blog that you can find out a bit more about enterprise architecture, business architecture, and a load of other topics that I've sort of brain dumped about in the last 12 months.
Fantastic. And yes, so those of you that are tuning in live, I've just put a link to Lisa's LinkedIn and blog in the chat, and please do connect. I always think, if we were giving this presentation in the real world, the audience would give a round of applause. I always think connecting on LinkedIn is like giving a virtual round of applause. So if you're tuned in, please do stay in touch. So, well, thank you so much, Lisa, for really a topic that I think will keep rumbling on, but a really useful insight. For those of you that are attending live, just a few things to mention before you log off. First is the next BA community webinar. And do remember, these are all completely free, so invite your friends. It's about agile estimation, which is that an oxymoron? We'll find out. We have Stuart Mann, who's on November the 8th going to give us a presentation about a fresh look at agile estimation. That's proving really popular, so do register for that one if you are interested. Also, in case you haven't seen it, most of you will be aware, but some of you might not be, that I edit a quarterly magazine called BA Digest, which is again completely free to download. I've put the link in the chat there, and that's a 60+ page PDF with various articles. And if you've got ideas for articles, I'd love to hear from you, because it's a platform for all of us. And if you would equally, if you want to be on a webinar, this is a community platform, so please do just get in touch. It's always great to hear from you all. So I'll also be emailing you a copy of the recording, so feel free to send that link on to all and sundry. But for now, thank you very much to everyone that's attended live or watched the recording. Massive thank you to Lisa. It's lovely to catch up with you again after nearly 20 years, it seems. Yes. There we go.
Can you stop saying that, Adrian?
I know. It's crazy. Doesn't seem it though, does it? But anyway.
No.
So anyway, good evening, everyone, and I hope to see you soon. So thanks again, Lisa, and bye for now.
Take it easy, Adrian. Bye.
Bye.